Today, I'm going to talk to you about virtual tools and tips for your online presentations. I thought I would start with talking about Zoom and just showing you some tricks that will make your Zoom meetings a little bit more interesting. And then we'll talk about PowerPoint and how to make your slides more appealing, especially now that we're doing all virtual presentations. And then lastly, I would talk a little bit about polling, and the software package that I'll talk about is Poll Everywhere. So first, let's talk a little bit about Zoom. So I think that it goes without saying that we're all used to Zoom these days ever since we started moving all of our medical education and other teaching and learning experiences to the virtual format. But even then, there's still a lot to learn. And I think that one thing I've learned, at least as a program director for a subspecialty fellowship in anesthesiology, is that there are definitely some advantages to the virtual format. One big advantage I found is that now we can invite audience members and participants from anywhere in the world. And so for our fellows, who we're trying to teach within 1 year to be subspecialists in regional anesthesiology and acute pain medicine, now our didactics can involve other fellows from other programs, as well as faculty and program directors from other programs at the same time. This really wasn't possible, at least not on a regular basis when we were doing in-person lectures. But now that we're doing all of our lectures on Zoom, now we can invite people from almost anywhere just to jump in. I do think there are some practical considerations, like think about your time zones. So for us on the West Coast, whenever I'm giving a lecture, I try to send the Zoom link out to all of the program directors of similar fellowship programs on the West Coast early enough so that way they can disseminate the link to their fellows, faculty, and their program directors. And then if people happen to join in, they can join in. It's great for our trainees because they get to hear points of view from other faculty, program directors, and even their colleagues who are currently going through fellowship training at other programs. And then it enriches the learning environment. In addition, I think the trainees from other programs get to hear what we're teaching. And I think in the end, really patients win, because I think anytime we can increase the amount of educational content, the breadth of opinions, learn from other people's experiences, I think that makes us better doctors. Here's just one example. So one joint session we had between our Stanford Regional Anesthesiology and Acute Pain Medicine fellows was with UC San Diego. We had their fellows, faculty, program director all join on our didactic session. And we covered advances in patient care related to pain medicine and also innovations in terms of technology for new regional anesthetic techniques. And what's great about this is, as you can imagine, you can be anywhere and access this kind of learning, which I think is a very powerful tool that we really haven't fully embraced, even though our lectures in person have all switched to this virtual format. Another thing to think about when using Zoom that we don't always consider is that you can break up your group. So Zoom allows you to create breakout rooms. So similar to live conferences where you may have an initial orientation session, maybe present some general topics, and then you want your participants to break up into smaller groups to discuss the subject matter, come up with some of their key learning points, and then come back to the main group to debrief or present their main findings as part of a full general session. You can do the same thing in Zoom. So you can create any number of breakout rooms. You can divide up your virtual participants into these smaller groups. They can discuss for a set amount of time because you can choose the time limit. And then when that small discussion section is over, you can bring them all back to the main room for a debriefing. So next, let's talk about slide format, because I think this is really a key point in terms of changing the way that we present virtually compared to how we used to present in person. One lesson that I've learned is trying to make my slides much more useful for my audience members. Since they're not listening to me present live in a lecture hall, I try to make the slides a bit more interactive. And so one thing that I've started doing is incorporating QR codes. You can find a QR code generator for free online. And this is just one example. If you scan the QR code that's on the right of the slide, that'll take you directly to this QR code generator. And what I'll do is, unlike my previous slides where I would just put a reference at the bottom corner of my slide and just use it for reference for my attendees so they can look it up later. Now I've been trying to make this much more interactive and easily accessible. So anyone who is viewing my presentation on a separate device can take their phones out, they can scan the QR code, and then that'll take them directly to the link for the actual reference, which I think makes it a little bit easier for them to get to the information that I'm quoting on my slide. Another important factor when designing your slides, which I think is even more important now that we're presenting virtually, is font size. And so we have to think about the fact that now, instead of having a fixed screen size, which is what we normally have when we're presenting at a lecture hall, now the screen size can be any number of different sizes, all the way down to a smartphone. And so you have to think about what your slides are going to look like on the smallest screen. So as a rule of thumb, while you're presenting your slides or creating them on PowerPoint or Keynote, you can zoom down to about 20%. So that way you'll shrink the slide size while you're creating it. And that'll give you an idea what that slide will look like on someone's smartphone. So I definitely recommend doing that when you're trying to create your slides. To give you an idea how big fonts look, if you're actually watching this presentation on a smartphone right now, take a look and see what 96 font looks like. When we think about 96, we think it's massive, especially when you're creating your slides on your own. But if you look at it on a small screen, it's not that big at all. And now take a look at the lines underneath: 44 font, 32 font, and 20 font. I think it goes without saying that the way we look at creating our slides and determining font size has definitely changed when you consider the fact that people may be looking at your slides on such a small device. So for myself, and when I'm creating slides, I rarely, if ever, go below font size 32, because I think that that is probably the smallest that I can expect anyone, especially as myself, at least speaking for myself, and many of my colleagues are starting to get older. It's very important that we be able to read these slides if you want people to get the information. One thing you can do, though, is, because you can imagine today with virtual learning, as some people may be watching your slides on a computer, they may be observing your presentation on a tablet. Other people may be trying to view it on a smartphone, or they may just be listening to you. I think for the latter group, I think it's very helpful to make your slides available later, so that way they can review them at a later time. They've listened to your lecture, but maybe they want to go back to the content and look at it a little bit more clearly when they're on a different device, or like their laptop or tablet. So one thing that I do is make my slides available. So I use a platform called SlideShare. This is free to use. You can create an account and you can upload your slides directly to the platform. That gives you a unique link, which, as you can imagine, if you combine that with what we just talked about with QR codes, you can create a link using a QR code directly to your slide presentation. And you can even put that at the very end as a slide in your talk. I think this just helps people to come back to the learning later on. Even though SlideShare does allow people to download slides, very rarely, if ever, do people download my slides that I've uploaded. Very often people will just view them on whatever device that they're using. And that just allows the knowledge to be freely shared. Another thing that I've started doing is using my personal website, edmariano.com, to create landing pages for educational resources. So on my website, I have a page for presentations. And if you go to that link, you can actually find all of the different slide shares actively linked in one place. And I think, again, this just makes it a little bit easier for people to find information if they're trying to find topics or content on topics that they either want to teach other people or that they want to learn themselves. So lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about polling, because I think that this is really a great opportunity to make your slides a little bit more interactive in this virtual world. And I'll talk about Poll Everywhere, because that's the program that our institution has a site license for. One advantage of Poll Everywhere that I've noticed is that you can create any number of different standard polls. So they can be multiple choice or true-false questions. They can be maps asking people where they're from. They can even be word clouds where people can type free entries, or you can even create competitions. A big advantage of Poll Everywhere that I've found in terms of just practicality is that you can install a plugin into PowerPoint that can take you directly to Poll Everywhere from PowerPoint, which I think is really useful because then I don't have to go from one program to another. I can just be creating my slides in PowerPoint. And then as you can see here, I can open up the Poll Everywhere tab, and then I can insert a new activity. And I can choose any number of activities as I described before. So just as a practical example, I created a poll. This is going to create a word cloud and ask the question. So what other tools are you using for virtual didactics? And any audience member who is participating in my talk can go to the website pollev.com/emarianomd, which also happens to be my Twitter handle, and they can type in answers to these questions. So I'm going to take my device now, and I have the poll open. It automatically comes up on my phone. And I'm just going to start typing in different answers. So I'm going to put in one platform, and then you'll see it pop up on the screen. I'll put in another platform, and I'll put that up on the screen. And you can see how Poll Everywhere, it actually, because it links directly, it installs the answers as they come, which I think is really interactive and also almost real time. You can do the same thing with your multiple choice or true false questions, or when people respond on a map, as when you ask people, where are you listening from? You can see these pins show up in real time. So I do think that this really is a powerful tool. And even though we can't be in front of our audiences live like we used to, you can feel like your audience is present and you can engage with them even while you're presenting virtually. So hopefully you found this useful. As I mentioned, we only had time to touch on a couple of different topics, which barely scratches the surface, but hopefully what I've told you will help you use Zoom a little bit better, hopefully improve your slide content and layout, and also incorporate polling for better interactivity. Thank you so much for joining. If you like this presentation, then please do so. Make sure you like it on YouTube and subscribe to my channel for new content.